Mrs. Jenny Jackson, do you have a comment?
Yes, I would like to go on with Eva Christina's idea there. I think we have to work at different levels, at various levels together, and to build a persistent commitment for, we often talk about peacekeeping, that's rather passive, but we really have to commit ourselves to peacemaking and to design what would that look like, and that requires a variety of stakeholders, both, of course, within Sudan, but also from the outside. And this is where we would like to, that is on our Christmas list to the Swedish government, to be considered as someone, to be considered as a relevant partner to design the peacemaking, not only someone who will implement it. Because I think we have different aspects that can be valuable when we design how it, and the strategy as a country working in Sudan. And I also think I would like to add, when it comes to the international level, that we can use our networks. The Swedish government have networks to work with. We have networks when it comes to the Swedish churches in other countries, surrounding countries. And that is one example that we're doing now, gather them, and even for them to make statements to the Sudanese government, but also to the world around. That is on the grassroots level. I think we have to continue to support the churches and the organizations within Sudan to be the ones owning the processes for an everlasting peace and development in the country.
Thank you. Dr. Simon Kobia.
Yeah, just to add one or two points on what has been said. First of all, to add another dimension to what could be the worst case scenario. As Dr. Dow said, of course, the worst case scenario is the referendum does not take place on time and leaves the people of Southern Sudanese with no choice but to take the last resort, which is to declare independence unilaterally. UDI is on the table because the people of Southern Sudan have said either referendum on 9th or on the 10th. We will pressure on the parliament of government of Southern Sudan to declare independence unilaterally. Of course, the UDI could be a last resort, but that has its own dangers. First of all, it will divide the region, because we know that there are those who will not be prepared to recognize a UDI, even within the IGAD. Unilateral declaration of independence. Sorry, I thought it is a term that is used. Yeah. Unilateral declaration of independence, UDI.
Okay, whatever the referendum, however it will go.
Yes, what they have said, if the referendum is not allowed to take place for whatever reason,
right,
technical or whatever, then the people of Southern Sudan are not prepared to stay with the status quo beyond the 10th of January 2011. It will divide the countries in the region, it will divide Africa, it will divide the world community, the United Nations. And then, of course, that means going back to war, because Khartoum will consider this as treason, and therefore they will say, well, we are still one country, and therefore they will invade. And the SPLA is prepared for that. So there is mobilization of troops on both sides, of course, in the case of if the worst case scenario happens. So we must be prepared for that. And one way of being prepared for that is for the international community really to be vigilant. And the work...
In what way?
In following very closely what the Khartoum government is trying to do in order to frustrate the referendum. Because that's some of the things that I mentioned here. The Khartoum government has lobbied many countries, both in the Arab world as well as countries in Africa. And I must say that even European Union is, in some cases, we don't know who stands where. And so this is one of the areas that I think the government of Sweden and those others who wanted to see change and a new political dispensation to take place peacefully. So we are wondering, what would the European Union do in case of a UDI, in case of a referendum not taking place? I think this should be discussed very actively. And what would the United Nations do? And this is where we count on governments of different countries, because the UN will have to decide after the referendum whether to accept or not to accept the referendum. And therefore, I would also recommend that you work very closely with President Mkapa. Benjamin Mkapa is the former president of Tanzania, who has been appointed by the UN Secretary General as the person to lead the UN panel on referendum, and will decide, he will write the final report. I met with him on Friday in Nairobi, and he is going to work out a clear procedure that he is going to use and the criteria to be used for adjudging the referendum, whether it will be adjudged free, fair, etc., etc. And he will be appealing to different countries, members of the UN, to understand what is going on. That is why I was saying that one of the things to do, and I agree fully, is to work with the churches, with the civil society, both at the local level and the international level, because I think these have tremendous experience in Sudan. And being vigilant again by way of, as I said, monitoring very closely this process, because of the attempts to rig the process the way I explained, because I think that is happening, is by exchanging information, is by sharing what we know within the civil society, the churches, and the governments, that I think will be able to help each other to understand what is going on, and then put the necessary pressure on Sudan. If Sweden is spending as much as the minister said in humanitarian aid, etc., certainly you do have therefore a responsibility to hold accountable, as Dr. Dow said, the government in terms of security, in terms of the rights that the government of Sudan should be giving.
Thank you. Mr. Th.D. I know you are a desk officer and Sudan coordinator, so you cannot speak for the whole Swedish government and Swedish people. But what do you believe you could do if this scenario would take place?
Well, as you said, it's hard for me to say, since I'm not a political person. I'm just a government employee, but and therefore hard for me also to speak on behalf of the European Union, which of course would perhaps be difficult regardless of political status. But anyway, I can say like this. The European Union is doing what it can to cooperate with President Mkapa on these issues, and this right now, yesterday rather, we had the registration process on the voters for the referendum starting in Sudan, and for the first time the EU is participating with election observers to actually observe the registration process, and this is something that we have never done before. We have always just been observing the actual vote, and therefore this is a sign of the importance we're giving Sudan, that we actually can be in place, because of course, as you all know, if you're going to cheat a voting process, you perhaps don't do it on the election day, you actually do it when you do the registration, so therefore it's highly important to observe that part of the process. When it comes to what kind of pressure we can put on the parties of Sudan, I can say like this: we do meet them all the time, and now I know that the foreign minister of Sudan has been traveling widely around in Europe the past months, and as far as the information we have received, what we are constantly telling him and the Sudanese government is that we are holding you accountable on what you are now doing in Sudan. Now, I do hope he is listening, and we'll see how much of a say that is having in the process. But we're not alone in this process. We're putting high faiths in the former President Mbeki, who is leading the African Union and the process they are having right now on negotiating all the outstanding issues between the two parties in Sudan right now. And United States is also putting high pressure on the parties. We know that. I don't know, but you've seen that President Obama has been doing it, and Secretary Clinton is doing it. And this is one of these cases where the world is pretty united on putting a strong pressure on the parties. Now, of course, they are the ones who have to solve it. We can only give them support. But, and let me just say one thing on the Christmas gift. At least, I'm not really in the position to give it, but I can say like this, that right now we're having a strategy for development corporation who is active between 2008 2011. That means that, of course, we have to do some thinking before that development corporation strategy is no longer in place. And the thinking is starting right now. And I take your comments with you, with me, and I'd also take them with me to Carlsson from Th.D, who's sitting right now, because as you know, Th.D is the agency who is implementing this strategy. We're giving the thinking, we're doing the strategy, but then Th.D is implementing it. So let's talk more on these issues. Thank you.